Hey guys, this is Titan again, and welcome to the 28th episode of Vedastein, my very own Cities Skylines project, of course. Now, after this very long episode of last week, or well, 2 weeks ago actually, for this episode I wanted to have something more simple and something shorter. And so on the schedule for today is the bridge you are seeing right here at the moment, as well as the transition onto the other riverside and also the transition slowly into the countryside. Although that is a topic for next episode. So what we're going to do today is this bridge and the sort of housing on the other side of the river connected to the bridge here. Now we already had a bridge on this spot here in for the last 10 or 15 episodes, maybe even more. To be honest, I'm not quite sure about the number, but I thought this stone arch bridge we had here before was a bit boring, and I wanted to have something more unique here. And so I decided to use this green steel or this green iron bridge. The bridge itself is from Budapest, and it's made by Raccoon. He's a somewhat new creator to the workshop and a very promising one. And so this bridge is also by him, and it looks really good. And so I also wanted to use it here in Vedastein. Of course, I had to adjust it a bit by, with PO, but the end result looks pretty good, meaning how the bridge fits into this area and into this spot. So I think it was the right decision to switch that bridge. The only thing I'm not quite satisfied with is the bridge rampart on the old town side of the river, which is this which has been like that for the last episode since we built that earlier bridge, and I don't really like that that ramp there where the road goes up to the bridge. It looks a bit out of place, but as much progress as we have by now in that area, I don't think it's possible to change that. So I'll just have to live with it. It'll be hard, but because every time I see that rampart on the other side there, I'm thinking it could be better, but it's too late to change it without having to change the whole area around it. So it'll be like that now. In any case, we already have progressed much further than just the bridge itself, because the bridge was a project that was done pretty fast. So what I'm doing now is just, as I said earlier, development on that other side of the river here. And the idea I had in mind was sort of around the bridge, and directly opposite of the old town is a bit more of a dense development with wall-to-wall buildings and with higher buildings and wall-to-wall buildings, like you see me doing here. And then as it goes more up the hill and further away from the bridge, the housing gets more open and there are bigger spaces in between the houses. So we have a smooth transition from Old Town to the bridge, and from the bridge to the countryside behind town. And when it's about ideas for basically this whole area here, I got inspiration from the towns of Meissen, which is not too far away from the original area of Vedastein, and from the town of Děčín in the Czech Republic, which is also very close to the original location of Vedastein, and it actually is Děčín also has some sort of iron bridge over the river, and it's on the same river as Vedastein technically would be in real world. So I thought those are interesting inspirations for this episode, and I think it really did work out pretty well in terms of what I did here. Now, as what I'm doing now is basically just plopping buildings. I'd like to talk about, because I got quite a few questions actually, concerning the last episode of Vedastein, where we built the Baroque garden. And I got questions like how many props I used and how many trees and whatever. So I compared the numbers before and after the episode, and I can say now that I used about 700 POs, which is reasonable, I guess. But I also used 9,000 props, which is quite a number. And if we are going to go further with that, I used 20,000 trees. Although, thinking about that, I kinda can't imagine that this number is right. Maybe it's just 2,000 and I misread that. But yeah, 9,000 props in only one episode is insane. So I'm thinking I'm gonna try to convert quite a lot of the flowers I used in the Baroque garden into POs, because luckily Cuboid Cuboid made this functionality where you can convert existing props and buildings into POs using Move It, which is great, and maybe I'll do that. Although with a couple of thousand POs it'll probably take hours to convert those. But yeah, we'll see, or I will see how that works out. But of course 9,000 props, that's a hilariously big number for one episode, even though it was worth it considering how the Baroque garden looks now. But hilariously big, I say. So back to this episode and what we are doing here. Now I had the idea, and this idea I actually also copied from the town of Decin, and that is having a parking square or parking lots directly next to the river, and that is what I'm currently preparing here. That the road from the bridge and the road that leads further into the countryside, with the quayside next to it, is higher than the actual riverside, and that is just because the terrain is already pretty steep here, and so the development of course sort of has to follow that terrain. And so the road is on the same height as the bridge, and that gave me the that gave me enough space to do parking spaces sort of beneath that key you see here. And when I'm having parking spaces there, I also need these stairs that I'm building right now. And the point of these parking spaces and these stairs is basically that it's for tourists, because if you arrive to Vedastein by car, you have to park your car at least somewhere. And I'm seeing that in a lot of riverside towns, basically, where the riverside wasn't really utilized or wasn't really developed for most of the time. In medieval times it was just a riverside where some boats were and maybe goods were transferred. Later on it was basically the same, an empty riverside with grass and boats that were loading and unloading, I suppose. And then in modern times it quite often got a parking space, which, I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of cars and parking spaces everywhere, but of course they exist, so we have to work around them. And having a parking space on the riverside, like you're gonna see me doing in a few minutes, I saw it quite often, and I thought it would also fit pretty well in Vedastein. So this parking space is made for tourists. They can park there, have to pay of course, and they can park there, and then they can use the stairs to go over the bridge and directly into the old town. And also the parking spaces are directly opposite the castle, so when you approach as a tourist from whatever direction, you of course always see the castle as the first landmark of the city, and then you park your car here, get out of the car, and look over the river, and what you see is just a castle sitting majestically atop the mountain, which I think is a pretty nice first impression of the city. Even though by now we're not already there, or we're not even there on the parking spaces. You'll see in just a few minutes. Sorry that I told you about that a bit earlier. Now, another big topic for this whole episode is of course working around these terrain elevations. You see me doing it just right now, somehow developing these very steep terrain elevations we're having here, and that by itself always is a bit of a tricky situation in Cities Skylines. You can either hide the terrain by trees, which also is something I'm gonna do later in the episode, because I thought in those areas it fit pretty well, or you can build houses on these terrain differences. I'm using both approaches here in this episode, so you more or less can look for yourself what do you prefer or what you like and can do in your cities, and of course use that as inspiration, because after all that's what these videos are about. Building something and commenting on it, and so others can use it as source of inspiration for their own cities. Basically to share and combine all our creativities into one. So here now I built the parking square, or parking spaces, I think, and I think they turned out pretty well. Nice is not the right word, I suppose, for parking spaces, but they turned out pretty good for what they are, and they look modern. I think modern enough that you believe that they got built somewhere during the last maximum 20 years, I suppose. And then of course another reason why this area here just has a parking space and not buildings all over the place, like to the left now, is of course that with a big river like that in a narrow valley, you quite often have some floodings. And while in older times people either didn't really care, or there just was no other possibility than to build next to the river and just live with the floodings from time to time. In modern days, of course, we just don't build where floods may occur and build higher up or so. And so that is also a reason why the parking space, or these parking spaces, fit pretty well there, so that when there is a flood, these there are no houses that get flooded, but just the parking spaces. Although of course there are houses next to it that would be flooded, but less than there could have been. So that's another sort of possible idea and idea here. Then another thing is this small river promenade I'm building here, and it's not just a promenade, it's also this little playground here, because that's also something I see very often in modern in sort of modern riverside areas, that they have some small playgrounds. They are usually covered with some I'm not sure what they are, some softer tiles that are not made out of concrete or stone, but some soft material, so children can actually play on these tiles and don't get hurt when they fall down or so. So that's something I also wanted to do here, and for that I used a different tile as a decal to sort of show that there are these modern soft tiles I'm not sure what material they're made out of, but maybe you also know those and know what I'm talking about. And now we further transition onto the mountain, and by that more into the countryside. So you'll see that the grid, if you may call it a grid, or the street blocks grow less denser. We have more of my cube houses, and by that you'll see that climbing up this mountain and going further away from the old town, the development grows less dense and gives more way and eventually goes into the countryside. But before we continue up there, here I'm doing something that exists on the River Elbe, which is the real world version of the Veda, and that is this walking path and bike path that follows the river. For explanation, this is called the Elbe-Radweg, which is the Elbe, cycling path, and it goes all the way from the spring of the river to the estuary in the North Sea. So it's a 1,000-kilometer long bicycle path, and it most of the time follows the river. And I really want to include that also in this series, so this is probably the first part of this bicycle path that will follow the whole river in this series as well, or at least as far as the series goes, will follow the whole river. And I'm glad that actually people are already using it, even though it's just to get to these houses in the back, but still it was nice to see. And also I'm using more bike paths in this episode than I have been, and that is just to encourage the citizens to use the bikes, because if you're not using bike paths, your citizens, I think, won't use bikes at all. So I'm just using more of those here. And then we are building a primary school here, because I think we have we have 2 primary schools so far in Vedastein, so we definitely need more. And so here's another one, a pretty big one actually, which is good, because I want, while I want Vedastein to look very pretty, I always want my Cities Skylines cities to function as cities at the same time, and so I always provide my citizens with all the needs they have. Even though looking at the display on the lower bar that we need much more industry, I myself kinda am interested to know how I will do with that. Maybe we'll do some big car manufacturing, more in the countryside or so. I'm not sure how I will do some industry in that city, but I think I'll find a suitable way to do some industry in this city eventually. So the last bigger thing for this episode now is a supermarket, because that's another thing I noticed, that there aren't let's say as many supermarkets as Vedastein as there would be in your standard German town, I suppose, or at least, I mean, I live in a German town and I live basically in the same area as Vedastein, and I know there are more supermarkets than that. Also more gas stations, which I think is something for the next episode. But yeah, so I'm adding this Aldi supermarket here, and again, that was quite difficult to do based on the terrain elevations. But I think it worked quite nice to have the this Aldi in between the housing blocks with another road, specifically, or maybe not specifically, the road was there before the Aldi, but having the Aldi on that elevated sort of platform here. And I think that also turned out good-ish maybe in the end. Here I'm using Bad Ideas and parking lot roads, and I think I noticed is, you'll see it now in the lower corner, that the parking spaces I'm putting up there kind of disappear because of the slope underneath the this platform. So that was a bit, or is a bit annoying, I guess, but as I think there's no good looking way around that, I'm leaving it like that for now, and I'm using these red tiles anyway to mark where parking spots are, so I think it's okay to have no parking lines down there for whatever reason. And what I'm doing now is just plopping some shopping carts and making a small shopping car house roof thing, whatever, out of my how did I even call it? I think my platform shelters. That should be it. Yeah, some small house for these shopping carts out of that. And the rest of this episode is now basically just plopping buildings. A good thing for you is that, or I think good thing for you is that I cut most of the backyard detailing out of the episode. For one reason, cause I wanted the episode to be a bit shorter, and on the other side, well, you know how I am doing it. And by now I think there is no reason to show it to you again and again and again and again, as long it's some sort of new kind of backyard detailing that I need to show you for whatever reason. So in this episode I'm mostly just plopping the buildings and be done with it. And not even all the buildings, but those are so basic things. You know yourself what I'm doing there, and there's no reason to show you every plopped house and every detailed backyard. One thing I'm showing you more towards the end of this episode though is the way I'm detailing the slopes in most cases here. That's what I'm also doing now, and because as these slopes are sort of in between these housing blocks, at the beginning I didn't quite know how to work around those. What I did then is just planting trees to sort of hide the slope, I suppose. But that also has another side effect, that at least in the real world, all these roots of the trees would stabilize the soil, and that's another, I would say, realistic thing about those. And as I think we have seen most of the content for this episode, let me tell you, that's it, at least from my side for this episode. Again, I thank you for watching this episode. It was really fun, or it is always fun to be back in Vedastein, and I hope you like it too. If you have anything to say, any critique, feel free to write in the comments, and of course subscribe to the channel and hit the tiny little bell icon to get notified whenever I upload another video or of course another episode of Vedastein. And if you want to support me further, you can do so on my Patreon page for early exits in assets or videos most of the time. And you can join my Discord server, link also is in the description if you want to get in touch with me or others who follow my works. That's it from my side. Have a nice time. Have a nice time looking at the cinematics now. And see you in the next episode. Bye.